Good morning, I'm Dave Christie with your LaRouche Organization Daily Update for Tuesday, October 21st. Tomorrow, Executive Intelligence Review, that is the flagship publication founded by Lyndon LaRouche over a half century ago. But Executive Intelligence Review, EIR, will be hosting an emergency international roundtable discussion titled "The Bering Strait Tunnel Project Can Open a New Era of Peace Through Development." So this intersects the proposal put on the table by Kirill Dmitriev, who is the head of the Russian Direct Investment Fund and one of the key negotiators on U.S.-Russia relations. But he had a post on X last week citing the proposal for the Bering Strait connection. So the roundtable discussion will clearly be taking up that in terms of the economic feasibility and advantages, but also will take up the required change in thinking in terms of international relations and ultimately for the future of humanity in terms of it having to be based on creativity. That's ultimately what it always should be based on. Anyway, so we have the EIR post on the roundtable discussion notes that this proposal by Kirill Dmitriev may be taken up at the upcoming proposed Budapest summit between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. Now, obviously, we don't know if that will be the case, but this discussion on the roundtable discussion is part of the broader efforts by Helga Zepp-LaRouche to put the Bering Strait connection as the centerpiece of the end of British geopolitics and the U.S. joining the new economic paradigm in terms of the integration surrounding the Belt and Road Initiative of China. That's ultimately the kind of economic corridors that LaRouche had envisioned and laid out through his science of physical economy. Now, in the EIR post on the matter, it also notes that the Russian news agency TASS covered Helga Zepp-LaRouche on the Bering Strait initiative, or the Bering Strait proposal. And in that TASS coverage, she states that it is obvious to President Trump that normalizing U.S.-Russia relations will open up enormous prospects for developing economic cooperation between the two countries. And then she cites the Putin-Trump tunnel, as Kirill Dmitriev has called it, saying that, noting that Dmitriev referred to it as a link between America and Afro-Eurasia across the Bering Strait. And then Helga Zepp-LaRouche says that the Putin-Trump tunnel would be the ideal embodiment of the peace through development concept. Now, readers may recall, or those that recall that immediately prior to the Alaska summit, where assumedly some of this was at least laid out, Helga Zepp-LaRouche had issued an urgent statement on August 11th, which was entitled, "Zepp-LaRouche Calls on Presidents Trump, Putin, and Xi. The Bering Strait Tunnel Project is the perfect war avoidance policy." Now, in that document, she says that when you are meeting in Alaska on August 15th, that was the Alaska summit, of course, you could agree to build a corridor across the Bering Strait, and with that rail and tunnel project, unite the rail systems of Eurasia with those of the Americas. This project would open up for development the vast untapped resources of Siberia, as well as the U.S. Arctic resources of oil, gas, precious metals of all kinds, as well as fresh water. It could become the perfect war avoidance program and greatly enhance the prosperity of the world. And then notes that this project has been studied and promoted over decades. Leading scientific and political figures in the U.S., Russia, and China, including Lyndon LaRouche. This was one of the key proposals of LaRouche as part of his idea for a world land bridge to unite nations around the development corridors that are now unfolding. Now, it should just be noted that Dmitriev's initial post on the Putin-Trump tunnel has now been viewed over 2.2 million times. And actually, Dmitriev has launched a competition to make the best short AI video on the tunnel. Elon Musk, who was actually cited as with his boring company, a tunnel boring company that Dmitriev cited as possibly playing a role in the project. Elon Musk has also posted a video about how incredibly close Alaska and Russia actually are. Actually, it's just 2.5 miles between the two islands, the big and little Diomede Islands that are technically U.S.-Russia territories on either side, but it's somewhere around 55, 70 miles, whatever the number is, between the mainland. Now, the confirmed speakers for tomorrow will include Helga Tsepp-LaRouche, the EIR editor-in-chief, as well as the founder and president of the Schiller Institute, Scott Spencer, who is from the United States. He's the chief project advisor for the Intercontinental Railway. We'll also have Professor Enzo Siviero from Italy. He's the director of the eCampus University there in Italy, vice president of the Rousseau Méditerranée des Écoles des Ingénieurs. My French is not so good, forgive me. As well as Dr. Alexander Bobrov from Russia, the PhD in history, head of Diplomatic Studies Division at the Institute of Strategic Studies and Forecasts, RUDN University. So now on it, the EIR post on the emergency roundtable also notes that China has been an avid proponent of the Bering Strait tunnel project for decades and certainly would benefit from it directly, and would be the kind of shift in the dead-end thinking between U.S.-China relations that we see with the tariff warfare, the economic warfare, and that could be part of the discussion between Trump and Xi Jinping at the proposed summit that they would have at the APEC summit at the end of the month here. We don't know if that summit will actually happen. That's somewhat dependent on the outcome of U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bennett. He's going to be meeting with the Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng in Malaysia in about a week. So depending on the outcome of those discussions, we may have a summit between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, which of course we encourage and will be organizing that the Bering Strait project be a part of that. But I think it's important to just stress that this discussion of the Bering Strait project indicates, number one, that would be the end of British geopolitics. But moreover, we're looking at a situation where London and Wall Street are now reacting to these positive initiatives surrounding the Belt and Road Initiative and the growing roster of linkages to that, those development corridors. And in fact, they're no longer setting the agenda. Since China initiated the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013, the British are in a kind of reactionary mode and out of their perch of determining the course of human history. So, and I think just to note that their response to the Belt and Road Initiative in 2013 was, of course, war. That's always their response. And through Obama, they launched the Asia Pivot to contain the rise of China. They launched the coup d'etat in Ukraine to initiate the proxy war against Russia. And I think we just have to reflect that the whole Maidan coup operation run by Victoria Nuland and overseen by then Vice President Joe Biden, he was sort of the viceroy of Ukraine. Those were in response to Viktor Yanukovych, the then president of Ukraine, who was refusing to sign the EU accession, the European Union Association Agreement, That would have began Ukraine's path into the EU and eventually NATO. And of course, that was the red line for Russia. But instead, he maintained the constitutional mandate of Ukraine to maintain neutrality. And had Ukraine gone with that neutral approach, it could have maintained decent relationships with the European Union, as well as with the Eurasian Association, Economic Association Organization, Eurasian Economic Union, and could have put Ukraine as a bridge between East and West. And of course, instead, the Ukraine proxy war was launched. We've had hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions, many of them, well, both Ukrainians and Russians dying, but of course, the majority of those being Ukrainians. Now, on that note, it should be noted that the Lord David Richards, who is the former chief of the UK Defence Staff, recently awarded the rank of Field Marshal, told The Independent in an interview that Ukraine can't defeat Russia. And then the interviewer then asked, even with the right resources? Richards replied, no, they haven't got the manpower. Unless we were to go in with them, which we won't, because Ukraine is not an existential threat for us. It clearly is by the Russians, by the way, is what Lord Richards said. So I think that just indicates there's an increasing awareness that Ukraine can't win this war. Even Donald Trump apparently made a statement to those effects, although he sort of said, well, in war, anything can happen. Anyway, but if Ukraine can't win this war, what was it all about? And clearly it was a response to the collapse, the ongoing collapse of the transatlantic financial system and the associated destruction of the physical economy. And that was warned. Lyndon LaRouche famously stated that this thing had already died in 2007. He warned about it then. This was on the eve of the 2008 financial collapse. And he said it could never be revived. And that's what we're dealing with. And what we did instead was we bailed out the criminal financial class, the ones that orchestrated the fraud of the mortgage-backed securities and all of that. We had trillions flow into that bailout and the ensuing bailouts of the COVID crisis and so on. In that context, it should just be noted that Goldman Sachs has issued a note to its customers. Zero Hedge has an article on this, but it warns, Goldman Sachs warns that there could be a so-called credit tail event. This is noted as an extreme credit loss scenario, widespread concentrated defaults, credit rating downgrades, or severe market dislocations in credit spreads. It's also could be a sudden wave of corporate defaults like we had in 2008, major counterparty failures, that's what the Lehman Brothers was all about, or a sovereign default or liquidity freeze. So this, we've already had indications that some of this may be already underway. And so I think that this, we also have the implosion of discussions of the implosion of the AI bubble, which is ultimately a part of the everything bubble, subprime auto loans, student loans, all of these kind of operations. So now I think it's important that, like Goldman Sachs' warning of the 2008 crisis, we should remember what China did after that crisis. They, offered assistance and alternatives to that failed system, but they also launched the Belt and Road Initiative as that alternative. And every step along the way of the Belt and Road Initiative, they repeatedly said that this was not exclusive, and that said that the United States and European nations could join this perspective. And even beginning in 2014, they began working with Russia on expanding this to the Bering Strait. Even at the moments of extreme tensions under the Asia pivot and the Ukraine, the beginning of the Ukraine, the coup d'etat, and so on. So I think we're at the point that the United States has to join this perspective, Europe, the rest of the transatlantic world. And I think as the lead of today's EIR.news says, the Daily Alert, it says the principles behind the Bering project transcend concrete, steel, and rails. It is a vision of peace through development, nations connected by purpose, not separated by rivalry. And that lead also ends, the tunnel and development corridors are physical and moral infrastructure, a platform for building a truly human future. So this is going to be what's discussed at the roundtable discussion. You should sign up to be a part of that. You can participate live on Zoom, or I assume watch it on whatever platforms are available. So join that roundtable discussion, and otherwise stay tuned to the LaRouche organization.